Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Matt's back, and I got a great thing I'm going to surprise him with. It's a good topic. Matt, now we talked about the UAP stuff, we talked about the UFO stuff, but I want to take this a different way because through listening to the 7 episodes you have on your show, and then also on your website as well too, you talked about like the supernatural as well too, and I think we never really dived into that. Like I know you talked about, at least in your bios, like you were getting deja vu as a kid. I'm curious to what would you define supernatural, and then what are some of your experiences behind that as well too?
To me, supernatural is it's an evolving definition because the definition now would be the definition, it would be different than what it was 30 years ago, I think because of quantum physics. So as of today, it would be supernatural would be ghosts, but it wouldn't be UFOs anymore because that's kind of gray now. That's been made gray. Um, any other kind of anomalies, like people talk about orbs, things of that
Mhm.
nature, like especially on these ghost hunting shows. See, I think this is just all science but we're on the precipice of discovering, I think, via the quantum physics modality, if you will. Um, my experiences with it would just be through stuff. I've never seen a ghost. I've never seen a UFO directly. Um, but have I had the normal kind of deja vu or had a thought or a feeling or thought something might happen either as a flash in my head or in a dream and then it comes true? Sure. And I don't know if that's because maybe we're born with that ability
That's what I'm
and then
thinking
we
too.
lose as we become adults and the culture we're currently in, we kind of lose the ability of accessing. I think we only now use what 10-12% of our brains. And I think as a child, before you're actually kind of molded, you have more of an ability to harness more of your brain, if you will. And because obviously scientifically we map the human genome and done a lot of research into DNA, we still don't really know exactly what every aspect and biological piece and parcel of our brain does and can do. So that's kind of where I'm at, I think, with that as of today.
See, I think everybody has the ability, and I think it's just being like an empath or naturally empathic. I've always had dreams that are kind of like deja vu in a way. They always end up coming like exactly like how the dream I've had, and I've had it ever since I was a little kid. But it is a you use it or you lose it type thing. I think it's dormant inside of all of us, and this is probably where my issue with technology kind of falls in. I think it's forcing evolution, and I think that's causing the natural like responses in the brain or things our minds can do, like creating a reality or creating something, to change and become a little bit more distorted. And I think with this kind of growth of like technology doing so many things that we could be doing on our own for ourselves, is kind of pushing it out the window of us being able to remember how to do so. Like when people say supernatural, when I say supernatural, I don't think of ghosts though. I think of ghosts as like paranormal to me. Supernatural is like doing weird shit with your mind or having some type of ability or something locked inside of you. Like I don't know, because that's where it gets complicated, because I've seen and I've heard people do crazy things when it comes to like tarot cards, for instance. It's
Yes. Oh,
and
yes.
as much as there's probably some true people out there doing that, it's sadly littered, just like a lot of movies are, with just a lot of Hollywooded up things. A lot of people on the internet saying, "I'll read your ancestors' fortune for you," and you're like, "For how much?" And they're like, 24.99. You're like, "You're not a tarot card reader," because a lot of these people do them on their own accord, and they kind of do them just for the love of the game and the fun of it, and maybe they believe this and might will it into the universe as it so be. But
And you mentioned something interesting where you have to use it or lose it, which I totally agree with. But now there's a theory that's out there now that you could regain it, and it has to do with a small gland in the center of your brain called the pineal gland.
mhm.
That the theory is that kind of is your supernatural organ. Um, and supposedly with the chemicals we have in our foods and the fluoride in the water, that it kind of calcifies it and it prevents it from serving its full function. And that's why maybe in third world countries or borderline third world countries like India, or maybe they're not, they're eating organically and they don't have fluoride in their water. They're drinking from the river or whatever, that those folks are more open to it and maybe have more abilities than we do in this non-third world civilized society. But it's a theory. Maybe someday it'll be proven, but right now it's just a theory.
Do you think that it's from the food, or do you think it's from the technology? I mean, come on, staring at a
It's probably
screen for
both.
so long. Yeah.
I'm not sure we actually even know yet the long-term ramifications of being exposed to cellular signals are. With the 5G, and then everybody's, people are worried about 5G. Well, I'm kind of still worried. I think we're cool with radio waves, but everything's on a different frequency. I mean, radio waves have been out long enough, radio and television, but cellular is a little different, especially when it's something that's amplified and you're holding, right next to your head. I'm not sure about that and how that could potentially impact people.
I think everything has an unsigned contract. Like, I think we didn't understand the use of plastics is slowly dropping our fertility count in the species. Our great grandparents, for instance, had like a 97 fertility count, and then they tested in 2011 the fertility count of a whole population of the generations coming up, and it had dropped by 47%. So
Mm-hmm.
that's all from the use of plastics. From everything that we use has plastic in it. There's actually plastic in our bloods right now. So I don't think anything's like immediate, like if you get if you cut your hand, you start bleeding immediately. I think this is like a long payout where it's like
Yeah.
eventually you're going to end up being hunched over because of your posture styles or something like that as you get older. And I wonder, because like with the supernatural and like this, I know the UFO thing got tossed into it. It does it a complete disservice, not just on the UFO topic, but the supernatural one as well, because that one has been marketed to the extreme. And it's been, if we were in another timeline, an alternate timeline, and we wouldn't have made supernatural a movie thing, or we wouldn't have used it as a way to get money or some type of thing like that if we just kept it. But I don't see, this is where I'm conflicted as well too, because then will we have a Salem witch trials? Because like the very first books besides religious texts were books about witches, and there was witches that would cast evil spells, and as much as the Salem witch trials killed a lot of innocent people, there were Wiccans that helped people as well too. And you kind of got lumped into the mix, where I wonder what happens instead of a society built upon steam power because we didn't go with electricity. Imagine a society that uses voodoo and magic.
Steampunk society, kind
Yeah.
of. Um, it's interesting what you were saying about long term. I wonder if some of these things we've been exposed to, we're going to have genetic evolutionary impacts on us. Maybe because plastics are in our blood, maybe that's going to make us evolve in a way differently than we would have otherwise, somehow biologically. Probably, I think it's possible. I think it's
I,
probable.
I think it's probably going to get to the point where you might start getting more devices put inside of your body. Like, as crazy that as that might sound for us, it's not that crazy for the idea of where we're going at the pace that we're going into. There's people more than willing right now to get. I talked to a couple biomechanical engineers. They're helping amputees get pieces to them. But then there's that fear of like someone's going to want to chop their foot off just to get a robotic foot because it's going to be better than their normal one.
Especially if it's paid for by insurance or the government, and you couldn't afford to do it otherwise. You couldn't afford the enhancement, but if it's a necessity or even life saving, you might. So it wouldn't be suicide per se, but it would be uh, like you're saying, like stab yourself in the eye to get a bionic eye, or cut off your foot to get a robotic foot. And I think that's probably how, I don't want to say AI would take over, but it wouldn't happen all of a sudden like in Terminator. It's going to happen slowly as technology develops and we start putting more stuff into us and attaching more things to us that are hooked up to the internet.
What do you think's a more probable future, iRobot or Repo Man, where they end up giving your organs like a mechanical one, and then if you don't make your payments, they come and take it back?
I think, and not trying to dodge a question, but I would say both. I would say Repo Man might happen more in third world countries. I think third world countries are going to continue to be third world countries in a lot of ways, and that might be one of them. But just because of suppression and dictatorships and that kind of thing, I could see that still playing out. Uh, But in like Europe and the United States and Canada, that might be more iRobot, but it might be that we're a new species. Instead of the robots and us, it's a mix of the two, Frankenstein, if you will. A new, I don't know what you'd call it, Homo sapien something,
Well,
tech, or
there's a
Homo
whole
sapien.
there's a whole thing of race now of people called cyborgs, and they're these people.
Yeah,
This is literally a trend going on where people are putting devices into their bodies. A dude had put a like a tube that went from the back of his head that was like one of those, the lighters that you can have that like looks like it's on a bendable part of like a retraction
yeah,
light or something. He stuck it to the
yeah.
back of his scalp and wired it into his part of his spine, and it's able to come up and go over, and it senses colors, and now he's teaching his brainwaves to be able to feel emotions off of certain colors like how we do, but be able to react and trigger certain memories. So I'm like, how fucking long do we got until people are like Apple Pay, and then they just take their arm off and scan it over a scanner thing and able to pay with that way?
And then just think about if this stuff's happening, instantaneously. I wonder, you'd have to turn it off if you're having a dream or a nightmare, because you could wake up and corrupt. It just automatically kicks off. I'll tell you, kind of in a parallel fashion, something that's happened in the last month that was real creepy and real thought provoking for me.
Since
It
we
was
talked.
actually kind of scary. Um, there's this website that I'm sure you would like. It's called Curiosmos, Curiosmos. And basically, German scientists, I don't know if their granddads were Nazis or not, basically, they created these mini brains that are, I think it's probably looks like probably the size of single cell, like amoeba. But these mini brains started growing eyes, and the eyes were responsive to light and stimuli. So they're created from stem cells, of course. So this was born out of stem cell research, and they're called brain organoids. And so now they started. Oh, it looks like, okay, yeah. So I got a note here. They're pea-sized, and it kind of looks like, if you see a picture of it, like a chicken embryo. But they started on their own to develop these eyes that respond to stimuli. And then there's all these questions like, well, gosh, they're mini brains. I wonder if they're conscious. And when I read that part of it, that made me kind of freak out. That's probably the freakiest thing I've seen in the last few
It's
months.
fucking Frankenstein, dude.
Yeah.
That's how that movie started, was being able to control electrical impulses in certain parts and be able to move neurons and stuff. And then it got to the point of bringing back somebody back from the dead. But like when you can be able to literally reanimate a corpse with like just using technology, like how much of it is it going to be you at this point? Like my thing is if we end up developing robots and then we end up making them like our servants, or we end up teaching them certain ways, they're going to end up advancing past us to the point where they think they need to fix us, and the way to fix us is by eradicating some of our biggest flaws, which are probably the things that make us most human, until we're not human anymore. But I'm curious to see, with how far is it going to be more of a cyberpunk era where people are going to be infused with technology? Because as crazy as that sounds, the whole entire escalation from stem cells, like what, 5 6 years ago, people are like, you're going against God, you're a horrible human being, it's how dare you take cells from whatever. Doesn't matter anymore. People are doing that more and more and more now. Now, you have to go to another country or third world country to be able to go and get one of these procedures done. But people from like Jackass do it. Mel Gibson did it. Joe Rogan does it. All these people that are major figureheads in the States have done it, where it's starting to become more normalized, where we don't look at it like when someone says stem cells, not everybody covers their ears. They start going, oh, yeah, stem cells. I've heard about that.
And I think it's probably, from a religious perspective, the folks that are against it, it's probably self-defense. Because if you were to create like these organoids that I was talking about, if they have consciousness, then do they have a soul? And if they have a soul, boy, that really would bother, organized religion. But, I kind of threw that away a long time ago when I realized, hey, there's aliens, and there's aliens from other planets, or at least I believe that's the case. What religion So if the God question comes into uh, focus, then I'd say that's because, maybe we're God. Because if even in certain religious texts like the Bible, because that's my only point of reference, God is everywhere. Well, if he's everywhere, he's in me. Well, if he's in me, I'm God. Just simple logic. Boy, you don't say that out loud in a church service for sure. But I think there's something, it's not quite that simple. I think there's something to that. And God's not a long, white haired, bearded guy on a throne. It's the closest thing I would equate it to would be like the Force in Star Wars or something.
Yeah, kind of like a willingness in all things. But you brought up an interesting point about like with UFOs, for instance, or just the alien topic, and then being like, well, then who's their god? So then maybe this might not even exist. Do you think that's why there's like a lot of people that are like so anti-alien, like for no apparent reason? Like there's just a bunch of people that are like, no, that's you're an idiot, you're a conspiracy nut. It's like, well, why are you so against it? Maybe it's because that means that there wouldn't be a god, because then who created them? It's like they haven't accepted that possibility. It's not saying their God's not true or whoever, it's their reality, obviously. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's the fear of this topic, is knowing if there is other life out there, then if we were created, did he create those as well too? Or did this just come from a factor of evolution? I mean, for the longest time, I thought like we came from apes. Apparently, no, we don't come from apes for a lot of people. A lot of people say, no, that's a stupid, that is not how it works. Even anthropologists will say that. So I'm like, what information is the right fucking one? Or is we all just taking shots at a dartboard?
Well, and as they say that, anthropologists, they keep discovering new there's never a missing link, but there's always new species, whether it's, gosh, there's so many, like Denisovians. I was reading an article just yesterday about a potential new species of prehistoric man. And it, it's like the crowd's getting bigger with all these species of prehistoric men, but there's never that missing link. But then where did the prehistoric, if we could genetically trace the prehistoric man, well, where did they come from? So maybe it's not apes, but maybe I think it's at some point that we all had a common genetic ancestor. And then maybe if you were to believe the ancient alien theory, they took whoever was there at the time, whether it was Neanderthal or Denisovian or whoever, and then tweaked the DNA and made Homo sapien. But it's a fairly plausible theory, in my opinion. But
What do you think's more plausible, that some type of being that we cannot see might have manipulated a gene, and that might be why we have a different version or a different species? Or do you think it's more plausible that something changed or something along, like for instance, me and you think differently than probably most of the public. There are sometimes we're talking to someone, we're like, how do you not see this? And they might look at us like we might be idiots or something, but we look at ourselves like, I just feel like we understand a little bit more about our surroundings.
mm-hmm.
Who's to say that we might not be a different variation of a species? Who's to say that
Yeah.
maybe that's what happened when all these species were walking and developing, Homo sapiens or whatever you want to say it? Maybe the branch off happened when a certain thing found a better way to survive, rather than like the Neanderthals. They went extinct because they brutes, they didn't use their heads. And then next thing you know, we got Homo sapiens that are alive. Why? Because we're able to evolve or adapt. I don't even consider all this stuff evolution. I consider this like adaptations to our environment, and we're making it easier with more technology, which we're adapting to and now using more of.
I agree with you there. And I think that without even bringing into different dimensions, so multidimensionality. So if we're just staying within this dimension, I would agree with the multidimensionality thing. Just kind of blows everything away, because it's not just that we're dealing with our solar system, our galaxy, and things or people or entities coming to visit us. It's like there's these other dimensions or multi universes that may or may not be in our. Just quantum physics is just so profoundly complicated. It makes it hard to kind of fathom, and you have to kind of, when we have discussions like this, it's like I have to compartmentalize to say,
Yeah.
okay, here it's like you have to set the ground rules to say, speaking from this set of ground rules, here's what could have happened or may have happened, and then you have to do it again in a different compartment with a different set of ground rules because it's so complicated.
It's a weird fucking world when you have to, when you're just talking and just having a general chit chat, that you have to clarify that this isn't like scientific evidence or this isn't this. This is just your perspective and your thoughts from what you've accumulated through your life. That's what I find weird about social media is where people have to go, my thoughts are my own. I fucking hope so. Because I mean, all of our thoughts are probably bits and pieces off of everything that we've ever seen, whether someone said something or we've heard something. But when you have to clarify that, like there are so many times the scientists like, well, this is me speaking, not my institution. I'm like, I get it because you got your education from there, but you're also a human being that probably had like 20, 30 years experience before you even went to that school.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, and people just, well, there's this political aspect to everything, and trying to be politically correct and socially correct, and I think that actually inhibits um, our ability to think freely. Maybe not so in private, but when you're having a conversation like that, it doesn't inhibit me, and I don't think it inhibits you, but a lot of people, I think it can inhibit your creativity. And especially I think you see it a lot with mainstream scientists. This Neil deGrasse Tyson, who absolutely refuses, when he looks at these UFO videos and UAP videos from the military, to even remotely give it a chance that it's, I mean, just he's bending over backwards to come up with explanations just because he's trying to be politically correct in that world he exists in, which is the whatever, the New York Metropolitan uh, Astronomy Lab, and wherever he works in downtown or uptown New York. And yeah, I think he's really, he is, and other people, you do yourself a disservice, which surprises me, especially somebody that's like an astrophysicist. God, that, I mean, you should be thinking out of the box from day one, and now he's just like in this little box. It's like
Could have dropped the show name. You said out of the box.
contrarian. Yeah. Um, so I think politics can get in the way of progress.
I think when it's like capture the flag, like
Yeah.
there's teams, except in this, instead of like when you lose, you have to shake hands. This time when you lose, you get fucked. Like they literally bend you on the field and take you down. And I
Mhm.
think that's with everything now is has to be devices. There has to be team siding. I was like, because I think we group think too much. I mean, there's what the people that think alone or think differently than the rest of the group, they either need to fall into line or suppress it, or they end up becoming these major stars because they're an exception to the rules. And it's just weird to see someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson limit himself on the idea that there is no alien life. And I'm like, I think he agrees that it's out there, but I don't think he agrees that it's been here yet. And I'm just,
Yeah.
eh, maybe he's right, but from what we're all seeing, if anything, this is a bigger like understanding that we might not have I guess the amount of information we do when it comes to technology, because I know that the government's like 50 years in advance than we are when it comes to technological devices. But the Bob Ross documentary that's on Netflix, I've said it so many times, but I really recommend listening to it if or watching it if you haven't. But the family that took him in, that owns the rights to his name and his face and everything like that, that kind of like screwed him over in a way. They were ex CIA, and they were putting suction cups on phones to record phone calls back before that was even a known thing to be able to do that. So like they were like, that was a CIA tactic that they were using that no one else knew about. Like no one else knew about recording phone calls, but they were able to record phone calls. So it's
Damn,
like,
I gotta watch that. I didn't realize it kind of went in that
yeah,
area. That sounds.
it's kind of like Tiger King, where you end up hating Carolyn Baskins at the end of it. Towards the end of this documentary, you end up hating the people that are using Bob Ross's company right now because you realize it's not his family and they're just making millions of dollars a year off of his image and face and everything, and they never even sold the rights.
Ooh, I gotta watch that. That sounds really cool.
It's but that's the world today, is a competitive get to the top type nature, and I think this has always been around us, but there was more aspects of like back in the day, you actually needed your enemy was always like a predator. And then like now it's like they're trying to find fake predators online. So I'm like, it's just a different method, but sadly, it's too sustainable right now. And I know as much as the world seems like in disarray compared to like we still go to work every day, we still do the same thing basically every day. The pandemic might have threw a monkey wrench into it, but there's a lot of stuff where I'm looking at like what they call microaggressions. Microaggressions now are like fake internet people online that are just sparking up controversy or retweeting the same fucking thing over and over and over again. I watched a person point out every single bot account to me. He took a picture of it and it had 50 different accounts. It's a copy and paste fucking tweet that they put up. And I was like, now what you're doing is you're not hurting people now. You might be doing something in your mind, which is good, but now your reality is impending on other people's thoughts and realities where their thoughts are now changing. How much of your thoughts right now, Matt, are your own, or how much has been influenced to you by the things that you've seen?
Mm-hmm. And I've run into some of those. I think I've had some encounters with those this past week, actually. But somebody somewhere is benefiting from this dichotomy, two sides in conflict. And I'm not sure how, but I think that it keeps, I'd go into like the Illuminati kind of
I believe in that.
stuff.
I
Yeah.
don't think it's like hooded men sacrificing like well and from what we've seen in videos, it actually is some sacrifice and shit going on. But I think it's more about a bunch of people with like suits and a lot of fucking money that just know how to twist the system to make it work into their favor.
Yeah, I think you're right. I kind of gravitate towards uh, old European aristocracy, and as opposed to like where you see things like people want to put Bill Gates and those type of folks. And I don't think first generation billionaires are invited. I'm not sure, maybe. But yeah, I gravitate more towards, because I mean, obviously Europe existed before America and South America and was civilized before most of Asia. I would gravitate towards that. Yeah, maybe some of the oral baron billionaires in the Middle East, but I would lean towards mostly European aristocracy that are kind of pulling the strings.
You
I
think
don't know that there would be many Americans, just my theory to it, but
you don't think that the Illuminati is an American thing, or do you think it's everywhere?
yeah, I think it's international. I'm not sure how many Americans would be in it. Um, like the whole Gates. I know people want to throw Gates into it. Um, I'm just not sure. But regardless, obviously I think it exists, and I think there's something to be uh, beneficial to them to have that dichotomy, and us fighting and being distracted like that by fighting with each other and not realizing what's going on, whether it's the UAP thing, if that's part of it, or knowing more about, hey, we actually are, or maybe we are in a matrix. I don't know. It's a theory that becomes more and more plausible as time passes for me, um, just because some of the things that I see and witness and have these little realizations at night when I'm going to bed, I guess. But
I think they plant eggs into your brain. And by eggs, I'm metaphorically speaking as like technology or influenced eggs that are just these things that hinder your brain's growth in a way. They slant,
mm-hmm.
like for instance, after watching that documentary, I decided I want to fucking paint. Maybe I have the ability Bob Ross is telling me I have to be able to paint these fucking trees. And as I'm like getting ready to like make the paint and do all this type of stuff, I start thinking, yeah, but I could be playing like on my phone. I could be doing something for like the podcast. And then I just totally lose interest in the thing I wanted to do and go back to being on my fucking device again. And I'm like, that's an egg that has been planted, which is now affecting generations. Like instead of like all these popular people, like Bob Ross was big for kids back in the day. Now it's all these kids are fucking adults and they're fucking excited to see Bob Ross because they remember growing up watching him or growing up knowing about him. Same thing with like Mr. Rogers. Same thing with like you can name any popular figure that was targeted towards younger generations. It's like that long payoff. You're not going to be famous now, but in 50 fucking years or 30 years, when those kids that you're fucking monitoring to end up being adults, you're going to have a whole population of the world that's going to love everything that you do.
And other non-related people are going to attach themselves to that image, um, to profit from it, just like you were saying with Bob Ross.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people have done that with Fred Rogers and others that have kind of have these multi-generational fame and prosperity. So that's also kind of feels like an Illuminati kind of thing to me too. Like you were saying, if it's eggs implanted in your brain, it's like I don't know if you'd call it like a rider to prevent you from only in your head. That's going to prevent you from only being able to do so much. Maybe that's something that prohibits our ability to have supernatural abilities, because there's something in there that's biologically or at a quantum level stopping us from advancing to that state. I could see that. I never really thought about that before, but yeah, I could see that as a possibility too.
What
There's something preventing us from.
do you now, would you look at that like, could you sue because maybe it's stopping you from becoming the person you could become? Like there's probably multiple different influences. I mean, a car can stop you from becoming the person you want to become, but at the same time, like when it comes to your thoughts, how many times are you thinking and you're on the cusp of something, but then something pops up into your head, like maybe you're hungry or maybe you're thirsty or maybe you could go for a soda and then you know that specific soda brand, or maybe you want a coffee, then you think of Starbucks, and then your brain starts linking to different avenues to be able to get you what you want. So it's like your mind is trying to keep you in a state of surviving. But then when it comes to our, it's, we're distracting ourselves and we're going too far with it. And maybe industries found out what that was.
Yeah, yeah, I like that line of thinking, because maybe it's maybe there's a constant battle that um, our mind, so to speak, is trying to break out, but there's this floating quantum programs that are out there that are, when we're about to be on the precipice of some big discovery, oh, I need to go to Starbucks, or something to that effect that distracts us.
It's a fish
So
on the hook. It's a fish on a
yeah,
hook. We're a fish on
yeah,
a hook, and we are. I don't think we know we're the fish on the hook.
yeah. I could totally see that. Um, but the technology is so advanced that stops us. I mean, maybe it's in the atmosphere. Maybe it's beyond. It's at a higher level of frequency beyond cellular, and that we get bombarded with. And maybe it's been there for a long time. Um, it kind of makes me think, but then why now? Because from what, 2000 BC to the 12 1300, technology was the same, and then I guess you had the Renaissance, and then slowly, and then when you had the Industrial Revolution, from the Industrial Revolution to like say 1975 or 80, big boom. And then once we got into computer circuitry, so like say 1980 to now, I mean, just quantum leaps. And then like now it's like every year it's like now, so now we're in this like exponentially increasing technological revolution that's like not that's just like, it's, I guess we're on a train wreck, we're on the precipice of a train wreck, because at some point some kid in Afghanistan could download uh, software that could 3D print a nuclear bomb. How long away from are we from that? And so, like, why now? If you look chronologically from an aerial view at time, is all this happening, and we're, as opposed to thousands of years where it was just kind of like the same old stuff, right? Um, there's something to be said about that. Like, what's is it because we're about ready to meet our alien makers, or what's going on with that? That's just something that that'll come to my mind every now and again. Why now?
I think if there are going to be first contact with aliens, or maybe they come and show themselves, they would just annihilate us. There'd be no point in having us around. As fascinating as we are, they might want to study a couple of us, but I forgot when it was. There was a time period in history where something happened and there was only 7,000 people left alive and they had to repopulate that. Like, so it was way back when, way, way,
Yeah.
way back. So I don't know
You could
exactly.
argue probably that the flood, because the flood transcends religions, that probably knocked the population down
Yeah.
at the time too. And the
But
Black Plague in Europe probably maybe not 7,000, but knocked a lot of people out of
yeah, but I'm curious as to where there's different class of civilizations when it comes to a civilization one, a civilization two would be like being space, living on the moon or living on another planet. I think this isn't the timeline where maybe this is the timeline where we make it, but then you wouldn't ever reset back to the beginning. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't have to reset to be able to go back up into space for the first time again, because you already have people that are already on another planet. So there's no downgrading to civilization one again. You're already on civilization two, unless those people die as well too. You can just go down back to Earth, build up the same thing you knew how to do in the first place, and then get it going again. So then you're never going to have to go back down from civilization two, and so you're able to build progress. But where's the like, is it just because the world like what happens on another dimension if the year 2000 happened, as soon as it changed over and all the technology did go away? What would happen? Will we all have to meet people in our area and then be able to find a mate that way, and then be able to have a family, and then be able to we would be more close together because we would only have candlelight, not electricity? Or you know what I mean? There's some weird shifts where I start looking at like, it's like if I gave you a brand new car, you're happy it's a new car, but let's say it's like a normal car, like a Kia or something. You're like, oh, it's a cool car. But then I'm like, okay, well, here's another car. It's a fucking Jeep. You're like, oh my God, I get another car. And then I show you the possibility of getting like a Ferrari. You're like, fuck yeah, I want a Ferrari.
hmm
That's kind of like what it is like with dating back in the day. Now that we have phone apps, you're seeing so much of something. Like you see someone, wow, she's hot, and then you look on your phone, this girl's even hotter. It's like then you just want to try and upgrade. Necessarily, you might not even have that chance to be able to do that. But it's now like this is why we have a bunch of people that aren't in relationships, is because they see someone that's attractive and they see someone that's more attractive. If you go to the middle of the fucking Middle West, you could be a fucking, if you're from a beach town like me, I'd go over there and be like, I don't know, I'd probably like a good classic 7 over there. But like here, I'm a 3. So I'm like, that's what I'm saying. Is like you start to realize like once you start expanding out, you start coming into more context with things, you start seeing more things, you start having a bigger perspective or a bigger kind of perception of what is your reality. And now your reality has completely changed forever. And it's very, very hard to go back to like, okay, not everybody looks like Brad Pitt. Not everybody looks like Jennifer Aniston. Not everybody looks like this, but that's all you see on social media, is that there's just incredibly good looking people. But then when you go to the store, you're like, why isn't that person wearing makeup? And this is when Antifa comes after you, or all these other social justice people come after you, is because they don't have to wear makeup if they don't want to wear makeup. Sure, but I'm not going to find them attractive. That's not your fault. That's not their fault. That's just the fact of social media has shown you so much porn that your brain is literally jammed
Yeah.
packed with triple D's or whatever the fuck you want to look at. And you don't see it in the world, and you're depressed, and now you're sad. And now you want to go back to your device, and now they're getting more view times.
You hit on something really cool right there. Um, we want to as each subsequent generation, we want to process things quicker, 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 faster, faster, faster. Whether it's our phones and our social media, or even watching Netflix. When I was a kid, it was you had a television season and you'd have like 20 episodes in the fall and 20 episodes in the spring. Now you can just go to Netflix, stay up all night and watch. I mean, and I think the more we process things faster, the more we want to process things even faster and faster. And I wonder where that's leading us to.
Well, you used to be able to do what? Play Xbox, and that was it. Just play the game. Just play the game. That's all you could do. It's all you could focus on. Now people play Xbox and podcast, or listen to a podcast, or listen to a song, or listen to an audio tape, or listen to a book. And now you can play Xbox, listen to an audio tape, or listen to a podcast. Also, be able to text on your phone. Then
All
it
while you're working from home.
Oh, look at that shit. Look at that shit. How many more things you going to add? Kids used to, I only have one screen I'm looking at. I don't have multiple screens, but every streamer and every person I see, oh, the people that are successful, the people that are all over the place, multiple screens, great ass studio. I was like, I don't want to make my studio any nicer than it is because then I'm never going to want to leave the studio. I'll spend most of my time in here. I only do this when I
Mhm.
come in and do a podcast. I fucking turn it on and then I'm out of here and I never come back into this fucking room unless I'm doing a recording because this is not where I want to make my home. I don't want to make my room comfortable because then you become lazy and you never want to leave. You should always want to go and explore out of your comfort zone. But when you make your comfort zone your home, when you make it so much to where you're literally at fucking work, like, one more minute until I can clock out, one more minute until I can clock out, one more minute, and then you just go home and you just never want to fucking leave anymore. Then you don't experience whatever
Mhm.
your life is. And if that's your life and you want to do that, go ahead. But that's necessarily not for me because when you open up that door for comfortability, when you start getting Amazon packages delivered to your fucking doorstep, you don't want to go back to going down your fucking driveway, possibly running into your annoying ass neighbor with their fucking dog or cat or whatever the hell they got on a leash, and they sit there and tell you about the weather. And you're like, I don't give a fuck. I'm trying to grab my package, my double-sided dildo I ordered, and I want to go home and fucking play with it. Is that okay?
And then your neighbor's like, "Can I see? I've got one just like." And maybe we're evolving in a we're being manipulated to evolve in a certain way because we're multitasking and doing all these things at once, and we're not really truly digesting things and thinking about things deeply. And it's just this superficial one shallow layer. This. I'm doing all this at the same time, and maybe we're going to genetically evolve in a way that makes us more easy to control, or who knows what nefarious ideas the Illuminati may have in store for us.
People protest about things and go against other people because they feel like they don't get them, they don't understand them, and they need to change their way of thinking because the way of their thinking is old. And then the older people that are just not used to all the new slangs or all the new pronouns, maybe they're upset too because the factor of you look at them like they're incomplete or they need fixing, and that subconsciously hurts them because that means they're an imperfect person. I think we're all imperfect, but there's ideas of what is perfect. Have you noticed there's like no commercials or things about like uh like back in the day, let's talk about movies for instance, and this is probably a very good example of like an upgrade that's a good one, and it's like body shaming used to be like if you even had a pound on you or anything like that that looked excess, you had to get it cut off or get something like that. Like old star movies and old films used to only drink like martinis and shit because they couldn't eat. They had to fucking smoke cigarettes and drink all day and be whatever
Mhm.
it was like in the 70s or 60s. Now it's like you notice there's no fucking commercials talking about anything body size really anymore. It's because now it's just too sensitive of a subject. You can't even do an advertisement about it anymore. I forgot what commercial I was going to mention in this episode just with that example. I didn't even think that was going to come out. But I saw it and I was like, this would be a good thing to talk about. Is that there used to be a bunch of old ads or like commercials back in the day talking about like weight loss pills and weight loss supplements. I don't see any of that shit anymore unless you're on that one channel that only plays like infomercial shit. But they used to
Mhm.
be commercials all the time. You used to hear Atkins diet, you used to hear all these types of things. Now, even telling someone here's a proper meal plan, they'll go, are you assuming that I don't eat well? And it's like, no, but this is how you get into shape. This is not a weird thing to do. Recently, I know a friend of mine who always used to think my eating habits were weird because I'm a fitness guy. So it's like a fitness protein, chicken, rice, all that type of stuff. And he's that's weird. Now recently he started doing a training program and getting into shape. And I'm like, you fucking get it now, don't you? And he goes, yeah, this is how you get into shape. I was like, you made fun of me so much for that. And now
Mhm.
you realize it's fucking, this is what you have to do. There is no like, this is freak, this is weird. This is how you get certain things done, or this is the method of how they figured this out. And then now it's evolved to like, maybe one day you'll just have a machine in your back that just sucks the fat out as soon as you eat it.
Not only that, with body types, um, it's also gender identity. And it's like
Oh,
you can't
Jesus
use
Christ.
pronouns, and this thing about binary and non-binary, like that's almost like, I mean, I think about that kind of thing, and it's like, are the grays that people encounter when they are abducted, is that us from the future and we've just evolved to this non-sexual species? What? Because we're at home, we never go out, so we don't use our muscles, and we get these big eyes, and we don't even have a gender anymore. Is that like what is, when I hear these terms and like non-binary, and the fact that you can't use pronouns or he or she in certain social circles, or even now I think in some places like job interviews, or how do you identify, and so, like, really, that's scary to me. That's, and that it's being pushed on you, that's really scary to me.
I think if it is the grays or whatever, is that if that's us from the future, that means we already have time travel now, because the idea behind time travel is you can't go anything before the time travel device was created. There was a guy who lost his dad, I think, when he was like 16 years old, and he's like a physicist, and he spent his whole entire fucking life trying to master time travel, and he hasn't. He's been trying to create a device to be able to go back, but then there's that realization of he can't go back farther, but he wants to see his dad again. You know, him and his dad were best friends. I forgot the name of the guy.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as into the aspect of maybe this timeline is eventually going to end. Maybe, I mean, if this is the end, it's not a bad one compared to like a fucking nukes going off like crazy. Maybe it's just a bunch of people just refusing to have sex with each other so nobody repopulates. I don't know. But I look at it like another timeline, another start. What, like the Younger Dryas theory, which is like that the earth had these coronal ejections that restarted life and all these things. I don't necessarily know if that's true, but the idea behind it is, then are we just getting better and better every single time? Is that what's happening? We're getting closer to the progress that we're supposed to get? Or does it always, like, is this the farthest this one has gone? And then it just ends up restarting again. And then it only goes to maybe 200 after death, 200 AD, because people ended up fighting too early. I don't know, because this is like the weirdest time where you're seeing more divisiveness and struggle when it comes to fighting each other over the simplest shit ever. And I think that's just an influence of how we're able to reach at a broader band. And I think that's the thing. Back in the day, people never fought each other all the time because you just came home to your family. You knew the people at your work facility, this, but now you're coming across people from countries and countries away that necessarily might not even be fucking real.
Yeah. One world government. It's interesting what you were saying too about the time travel. I think, or my theory is that it's not my theory. I've adopted it, that you can break paradoxes. Like for the grandfather paradox, if I could go back in time and kill my grandfather, would I no longer exist? And then the theory is that, well, you would, but when you do that, you instantaneously create a new timeline. So I think there are ways to get it. Like there's a paradox breaker, so you could go back if you were time traveling before you were born or before. I think there's all these. I don't want to even say rules in quantum physics, but I think that you can break these paradoxes that we used to, in theory, say, well, you can't do this or you can't do that. I think there's a way around it,
Do you think
and that would be this multidimensional quantum. Okay, well, yeah, you did. You went back in time. You killed your grandfather, but now you created a new timeline. And like you were saying earlier,
you
maybe
got to
like
fuck your
you keep
grandmom at that point?
you keep resetting, and it's like a video game when you get killed. When you start back at the beginning of the level, hey, I'm not going to do that again. Now I got a little bit further, but then I got killed again. You're at the beginning of the level. Okay, now, and then as you're learning and you're getting further and further until you beat that level and go to the next one, maybe.
Do you think that when it comes to like a simulation or something, it seems like you were hinting at that in the beginning. Do you think that it starts ticking down when you start finding the groove or the trick in the simulation. Like the people that live to be 90, the people that live to be whatever, maybe they never found the groove that they were supposed to fit in. But then, like, what about the people that die at like 30 that are super successful? Maybe it's because they hit the right trick in the simulation, then everything was up the staircase from there.
Could be. There, there's also a lot of thoughts in the holistic community about when people die young that they're leaving early for a reason. So if you were to believe in the concept of reincarnation, that you're doing things that are beneficial to this timeline or this universe, and you had to check out early because you're sacrificing that lifetime for other people because of some certain circumstance that the ethereal is having to protect the three-dimensional humanity against. I know, kind of pulled that in from left field, but
I got another one from left field. Ready? So, did you ever, when you were a kid, did you ever like graffiti? Did you ever carve like something into a tree? Did you ever leave a message on a wall or something like that when you were a kid?
yeah, well, actually, ninth grade, the JV basketball team, we climbed up in the top of the auditorium at high school, where all the stuff is, where the lights are, and we spray painted like the Doors or Led Zeppelin, Zoso, and all that stuff. Did that, a few times when coach was late for practice or something like that.
Who's to say that one person maybe now or maybe a month ago or maybe a couple of years ago didn't climb up there thinking that they wanted to end it, and they saw maybe some of this graffiti that was covered up but you could still read it out and saw like Led Zeppelin, then they're able to listen to Led Zeppelin, they've never heard of them before, and then get this whole new music that inspired them to keep on living. Now you have just created a reality where you save somebody's life. Now, did that happen? No, it's hypothetical. But who's to say? Who's the fucking what's a hypothetical? That's the thing, is like there are things that people go like I remember like when I was at a funeral, it was my close friends, not his death, it was a family member of his. Um we were over there, I was saying my last respects, and then his little sister came up. I haven't seen him in like 6 7 years, so I didn't, it's hard to recognize because she was like 4 or 5 at the time. She goes, "Are you Robbie?" I'm like, "Yes." She goes, "You don't remember, but you saved me from that car." And I was like, "What? Like, what are you talking about, car?" And then she goes over to my buddy's mom, starts I hear him like over in the distance. I'm kind of eavesdropping a little bit. And she goes, "Yeah, he saved you from that car." And then she goes, "You don't remember that?" I go, "No." I was like, I guess when I was 14 years old, she was playing out in the street. Car was coming by. I wasn't paying attention. Dude was texting or something like that. And I grabbed her and moved her out of the street. This is 100% legitimate. I like didn't even think about it, and then I remembered it as they were saying it. I was like, "Holy shit, I do remember that." I didn't think it was that big of a deal though. Like it was nothing like a speeding car. It was just a fucking slow car that was going, and a person wasn't fucking paying attention. Like going 20 miles an hour. It's not fucking fast compared to when you see a movie and a toddler, you just see a fucking shoe roll off into the street. But
Uh-huh.
I didn't think of it as a big thing. I just thought it was like, oh, it's a close one. You know what I mean? Like when a dad catches a kid, they don't ever talk about it again. It's just like oh, it was a dad reflex. It wasn't me as a dad. It was just me as like a reflex that just, oh, I moved him out of the road so he didn't get hit. You know what I mean? A fear. And it became this thing, and I just remembered it. It was suppressed. But that could easily go to my head. I save lives. You know what I mean? No, it's it's a reality that happened, but I didn't hold on to it. And you start to see with the world today is people hold on to a reality from something way back when. And it's like, why are you still
Mhm.
holding on to that? There are people probably out there right now that we went to elementary school with, where it's like that motherfucker stole my chocolate milk at lunch. And they're just harboring that hatred like 30, 40 years later, to where eventually they snipe you out of a fucking building. I don't know, but that's their reality. You start to
Yep.
see the regression of people when they never get past a certain roadblock. We both, me and you both, probably deep down, not even thinking about it, have something inside of us that we're still holding on to from like a childhood or something like that. That's never letting us excel into the next level, or never letting
Mhm.
us go to this other place where you truly lose all chains of this this mortal world or this mortal reality, to be able to find what that next level could possibly be. I'm not saying that's 100% fact. I'm just fucking shooting shit into the wind. But at the same time, it's a weird idea or concept when you look at the people that are the most happiest also hide some of the most pain. They keep their head moving forward, but their mind still holds on to things in the past that they're subconsciously thinking about.
Like Robin Williams.
Yes.
So like, I think what you're referring to, one of the best examples of that is in the movie It's a Wonderful Life, where Jimmy Stewart's character, when he thinks about taking his life, and the angel comes and Clarence, and then he doesn't exist, and the angel shows him what the town would be like if he never existed, and it's all these bad things, and this building's run down or whatever. But I think the truth of that would be, if you could do something like that, is if you no longer existed and you went back in time, yeah, it'd probably be a lot of bad things that may have happened as a result because you didn't do something, say something, or there'd probably also be a lot of good things, because from the flip side is, maybe an innocent gesture that I did cause something good to happen or bad. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just, an action on our part can create a series of events, good, bad, or otherwise, that if we weren't there, it may not happen. So I think it kind of swings both ways. Another interesting piece to that is, if you've heard of people that are channelers, or they channel like Law of One or Bashir. In the Law of One, it was a famous channeling session in the 80s with a extra dimensional entity. The extra dimensional, they would ask questions. The extra dimensional entity talked about in the timeline that we were in, that because of the Nazis killing all the Jews, that a lot of technological advancement didn't manifest because some of these Jews that were killed were scientists, and that they would have done this or that, and it would be, we would have lived in a different society, even more technologically advanced society than we currently live in. Like, if you've seen, since you recommended a documentary, I'm going to recommend a show for you. If you haven't seen it, The Man in the High Castle.
I haven't seen that one.
It's the Nazis and the Japanese won World War II, and it's in the 50s in the United States. And the Nazis were able to continue their heavy water experiments and do all this technological research. And it's 1955, and you can fly a plane from New York to Berlin in like just a couple hours, and then you realize as the show progresses that it's a different dimension, because they travel to the dimension that we're in, where the Americans and the Allies won the war. So it kind of gives you a lot of perspective and things to think about.
Jesus Christ, if the
Yeah.
Nazis won, and then Unit 731 also teamed up with they were worse than the Nazis were. People go like, the Nazis are the worst ones. I'm like, no, Unit 731. Anybody out there listening, look that shit up. That's a fucking fear. Those are psychopaths. They vivisection people, cut them straight from the bottom up. Just let them bleed out, just to test how long it takes a person to die that way. It's fucking nuts to me.
Yeah, geez. I mean, yeah, awful stuff. But yeah, it makes you wonder, right? Because that show is interesting, because it's multidimensional, but then you get to examine that other dimension where your history is different, or the history that didn't happen that way, and then the ramifications of that. There are good things. America was Nazism, except for the Rocky Mountains, and the Japanese had taken over. They had the West Coast. So, but technology, there was better technology. There was greater technology. So, there's good things that came out of that, and there's bad things that came out of that. And it's not, maybe good and bad's not a great dichotomy to use. It's just, they're just things. Good and bad is defined as our perception of what we think is pleasurable or not pleasurable, I guess. But it's just, at a quantum level, it's just a series of events, and it doesn't matter how it makes you feel. It just happens.
Maybe the series of events that are unfolding now is neither good or bad. Who's to say,
It
right?
just is, right? Yeah.
It is what it is. Maybe this is the way that it's supposed to go. Maybe
So,
everything's
if you
just
think the
falling in place.
Illuminati is controlling us, well, then there's somebody controlling them if we're in a matrix. Or, who knows who the real puppet master is or how many levels it goes up. But
It's that realization when you think you're the great white, the top of the food chain, and then you realize there's something bigger than you.
mhm, there's always a bigger fish. It's from one of the Star Wars movies.
I always thought it was there's way more fish in the pond, or there's other fish in the sea.
Yeah, that's true too.
That
Mhm.
leads back to our device thing, talking about there's always an upgraded version of that person that you find attractive. There's always someone else who's better looking. There's always another fish in the sea. Yeah, okay, well, don't shoot for a Kate Upton size model. Just try and find one that you actually care about.
And it also comes back to the point about it's just superficial because you're just looking at a one-dimensional picture and you don't even really have time to know the person, to know if you're actually compatible personalities or even true similar interests and that kind of thing. How you would, because humans are are complicated like that. It's not just about the physical appearance, although that's very important. It's about how you could coexist, or if you could coexist, if you complement each other, or if you kill each other. It's usually the latter. You want to kill each other, and that's why relationships don't really last.
What do you think would be a good thing to happen that could totally stop the or halt the progress of destruction that we're suffering from?
This is highly controversial, but from the perspective, it's going to sound really bad, but I have to say it because it's the truth in my head. From the perspective of all life, all entities, whatever they may be, what if humanity in this time frame or timeline is a virus? And we got 5 billion, 6 billion people hanging off this planet. Maybe we need to be called back some.
Jesus Christ, Matt. It was dark. I was like, where's he going with it? He popped out gender identity before. I was like, I hope he doesn't hit that one. But now, let's talk about it. Okay, I mean, the Thanos snap, dude. I understand that. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of people, but I think there's a better way to work in rhythm rather than we're all kind of fighting and flailing in the water and then we're using someone else as like a quick 5 second like life preserver. We're dragging other people down as well too. And I think there's a better way. I was thinking more of like an EMP that just takes out all electronics and just watch what happens in like the next month. We all got together when this first thing started in fear that people were going to start dying left and right. I just think right now it's very hard that we keep getting set back into our routines and set back into a system that just wants you to be productive. And being productive is working. And when you're not working, thinking about working. And I don't think that's a correct way to be living.
I think what you're saying, what you're suggesting, which is a very real possibility, either from a man-made device or from solar X flare, would do both. What I said and you
It
said,
needs to
I
be a
think,
solar. It needs to be a solar
yeah,
one because if
yeah,
it's
yeah.
man-made, then you're going to want to find the person that did that
I
in the
did it.
first
Yeah.
place.
So if you were in a big city, though, as opposed to a country town, I think you would see two different realizations play out. I think if you were in the country town and you're fairly self-sufficient, it would be mostly, yeah, kumbaya, come together. I think if you're in New York City in a concrete jungle and that happens, there's going to be a culling at first, and then the survivors would come together because there's just not enough resources, and there wouldn't be supplies coming in, and you just be
Mad Max
survival of the
territory.
fittest. And then at some point after the violence, then it would be truly would have to be reborn. Kind of makes me. I've always had that thought. Why I never want to live in a huge city like that, like New York or Chicago. You'd be isolated in and even in a geological event or something like an earthquake, you'd just be stuck. And that's played out in a lot of disaster movies and stuff like that. But I think there's probably some truth to those stories that are told. Or if you're in Oklahoma or you're in Nebraska and your closest neighbor's half a mile away and everybody's got a farm, hell, you'd probably be all right.
Couple of guns.
Yeah. You know how to hunt, you know how to grow crops, you know how to Um, you're probably from a culture that has a lot of home remedies. When people get sick, you can improvise. You can, I think you'd probably be all right. But in a big city where people are on top of each other, oh, that's a scary scenario, I think.
So the rule of thumb is large open fields, no
Population under 20,000.
population.
And you want to be located in a place that's not ice. You don't want to be on an island. You don't want to be, um, but humans, yeah, I wouldn't want a bunch of people to die, obviously. But if we're at 6 billion people and we're not evolving and maturing, do you want, or does anybody want that chaos to spread out into Mars, the moon, the asteroid belt, and these crazy viruses known as Homo sapien are just spreading like rabbits without mentally and emotionally maturing? If we're still, that's where maybe if aliens do exist, they're going to be like, no, we're not going to let you do that. Stay there. We'll wipe you out or we'll help you mature, but yeah, you're not spreading that shit. Or maybe they're worse than us and looking down at us. Maybe they're jealous, or maybe we're the good guys and they're not. Who knows? Or it's probably a lot of scenarios. There's probably a whole lot of alien and quantum species that exist. It's a hodgepodge, I'm sure, in fact, but
Too many chefs in the kitchen.
yeah, I would say so.
Well, Matt, where can people find you, find your website, find every link that you possibly have?
So I have on Facebook, Matthew Gregory LLC. Then I can invite you to my Spot group, which is Salem Paranormal Observations, Causes, and Knowledge. And then it's www.nebulacalling.com.
And I'll link it all in the description. Is there anything you want to let the people know out there besides the world's probably going to end? Is there anything out there you want to let them know? Positive, maybe?
Yes. Just because the world's ending doesn't mean that you are. There's life beyond the end of the world.
I like that. I was wondering how you were going to
Very
turn it around.
thought-provoking.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
That was a good
Yeah.
one.